And I think, where we've excelled at Alice is we have a team of 200 plus PhD dark web experts that are speaking at major conferences and in front of Congress on all of the harms and threats that they see on the dark web. And that expertise that we can then break down into storytelling really gives us instant credibility. And it shows how important, this is and why the foundation model companies should address it.
Welcome to Frank Growth. I'm Jason Shafton, and I run the growth consulting firm Winston Francois. Around here, we tell the truth about growing, the good, the bad, and the can't say it out loud ugly. Every episode, we get tactical with operators, investors, and builders about what works, what breaks, and what to do next. No fluff, no vanity metrics, and certainly no hustle theater. This is just signal. Welcome to Frank Growth. Let's get into it. Today, we've got John O'Donnell, How to Sell Trust, the go-to-market playbook for mission-critical AI infrastructure. Before we bring John on, a quick riff on today's topic. Most GTM problems come down to this. You have something important, and no one knows how to talk about it. AI trust and safety is the extreme version of that problem. You're selling infrastructure that works best when it's invisible. Your value prop is, nothing bad happened. Good luck putting that in a deck. The three traps I see in these kinds of GTM situations: 1, selling features to buyers who haven't admitted they have a problem. FOMO gets people in the room, but fear alone doesn't close the deal. You need a real use case, or that 11th hour stall will kill you. 2, throwing headcount at a motion that isn't repeatable yet. More reps amplify what's working and what isn't. If you don't know which it is, scale is a liability. And 3, assuming that being in the room with the right logos is the same as pipeline. Credibility and trust open doors, but qualified deals come from structured motion, not brand heat. Great GTM looks like in a category creating sale is this: method acting, not sales scripting. Live in your buyer's world until you can think like them. Thought leadership that earns access. Research and benchmarks build trust before that first sales call. And knowing when to pull the trigger. Not too early before infrastructure is ready, and not too late and miss the window. That's the frame we'll use today with John. Let's go. John, welcome to Frank Growth.
Good afternoon, Jason. Pleasure to be here.
Before we kind of get tactical and into the weeds, maybe in one sentence, what does selling trust actually mean?
Selling trust is the reassurance that after the ink is dry on the paper, that you'll still be there. When your buyer needs to put their trust in you, that they're using their budget, their job could be at risk, they could put themselves in a bad position. They want to know that they're not alone during the sales process, but more importantly, after the sales process.
All right, let's dig in. You've described your approach to go to market as method acting, which I absolutely love. Living inside kind of the buyer's character and ultimately then taking on the seller persona. And famously, like I think Daniel Day-Lewis, it lived like inside of every role he played. Walk us through exactly what this method acting looks like in practice.
And I love Daniel Day-Lewis, and I think he's a perfect example. When I go to engage with a potential client and having the team take the approach, we start with the approach as if we were positioned with the problem. Where would we turn? What resources we'd have available, if there is even going to, as far as identifying organizations or trade associations that have had events where you could review speaker topics or even review content that might be on YouTube or on the other social media platforms. So if you have to solve the problems of a CISO, or if you have to solve the problems of someone that's responsible for AI safety, really putting yourself in their shoes and starting with the research, starting with what's publicly available so that you understand if there's regulation and compliance. You start understanding and speaking their language. So from my point of view, someone shared with me early in my career that if you can't explain what you do to an 8-year-old and an 80-year-old, then you've missed the mark. So the more that you can live in the client's shoes, starting with the trade associations, reviewing information that they have publicly available, allows you to then go back to the use cases that you're solving, the investment that they will trust to provide you to solve these solutions. You're able to then break it down into terminology that they understand, and you get instant credibility. You get that reassurance that they know we know them and they must have done this before.
You've kind of built pipeline in multiple categories, John. Cybersecurity, music distribution, and now AI trust and safety. Completely different buyers. What is the common thread in how you kind of approach this brand new persona that you need to take on to sell to this new customer?
Again, it goes back to speaking their language and understanding the circles they travel in. So whether it's the CISO or head of security that might rely on forums in Reddit or LinkedIn groups, or in the music industry, it was going after those that rely and communicate through Discord, or even where, we are today with Alice, going into these forums, that user groups with some of the foundation models. If you hang out even virtually in these circles, not only will you acquire knowledge, but you'll be able to pinpoint those individuals that are concerned or need to address these use cases. Everyone's very busy, as we all know. So if they're spending the time and effort to congregate in these circles, I believe there's smoke. And where there's smoke, there's fire.
Alice works with the top 10 AI foundation model companies on safety and guardrails. How do you market something that is mission critical but essentially invisible when it's doing its job?
We started our journey 9 years ago with having that dark web insight, really being the experts, thinking like bad actors, and being able to share those stories. I think what's really powerful is that after you've engaged with, someone at the foundation model company, leaving behind the story so that when you're not there and they're speaking on your behalf, you've provided a story. For example, if there was news recently of a large retailer that had a chat bot that went off the rails, right? And being able to break down that story, and then, again, when you're sharing what you do and the company history, all important, but in most cases, it goes over their head. That's not important to them. Having that story to correlate. Oh, Alice, yeah, that's right. That's the company that would make sure that our chatbots don't go off the rails and start arguing with our customers, right? Breaking it down for the 8-year-old and the 80-year-old. So the storytelling is really, really critical, because there is a balancing act. And this is something not only at Alice, but I had done in the past with the cybersecurity. What you don't want to come across as an ambulance chaser, right? You don't want to be in a position where you're providing fear, or you're approaching someone after they've had an unfortunate scenario by looking then to sell them the solution. You want to make sure that you're providing trusted advisor, looking to help, provide additional resources, as much as you can do with, not charging them for it. But before they get that proactive approach, it's really important to have those stories. And if you can have stories that are relevant to their industry, even better. And I think, where we've excelled at Alice is we have a team of 200 plus PhD dark web experts that are speaking at major conferences and in front of Congress on all of the harms and threats that they see on the dark web. And that expertise that we can then break down into storytelling really gives us instant credibility, and it shows how important, this is, and why the foundation model companies should address it.
Benchmark reports and research are central to Alice's GTM. How does thought leadership convert to kind of commercial pipeline? What does that process actually look like?
So, from a thought leadership perspective, the industry is growing so quickly. And even at the most advanced organizations, whether it's, Gemini or OpenAI or Anthropic, you can go down the list. Everyone's starving for information. Everyone's trying to gauge and understand, are they doing enough? What are their peers doing? What are we missing? So, what the benchmark reports have done a tremendous job having that third party data to validate what the security or safety harms would be, then converts into truly being that trusted advisor. If we're able to provide that insight, then they trust us and they want to know what else we can do with them to expand that better together story.
You mentioned to me this AI FOMO problem, kind of executives pushing teams to do something with AI before they've built out a use case. How does that dynamic affect your sales motion?
Yeah, it's a challenge, because, my belief and for the team's belief is that when you're engaging with a prospect or a customer, you always want to bring something of value. The multi emails about us of like, hey, do you have an update? Have you talked to your boss? Where are you in the journey? That becomes noise. You lose credibility. And we know they're going to need Alice. They've shared with us that they need to address anything they deploy eventually will need security and safety controls in place. So it's just a matter of time. And whether it's our benchmark reports, whether it's opportunities to speak with our research team to provide insight on how different models perform for their use case is really important. So you want to stay very close. You want to always try to provide value versus just the token. Haven't heard from you in a while. Should I take you off my list? You lose credibility. I don't believe there's a need for that in this day and age. You want to ride the journey with them because as we started off the conversation, Jason, when you think of trust, trust is so important that you're going to be with your client through the entire journey. And if you're not providing value, it's a missed opportunity.
Completely agree. What does that playbook look like though for converting the anxious, we have to do something with AI energy into like an actual committed and qualified deal?
Yeah, so for now, it's trying to provide visibility with regards to we're fortunate enough that we start the journey with with our clients in pre-production. So as they are assembling teams to go to market from cyber governance, regulation, and engineering perspective, these teams are starting to form within organizations as they're building and deploying AI models and agents. And it's really, can you push them over or walk with them, I should say, over that, final finish line and give them reassurance that it's not going to endanger their brand. It's not going to put them in the news. And what we do is typically take a milestone approach where we start off with one agent or one model. We monitor with humans involved in the beginning to make sure that people feel comfortable, that it's going to respond in a way that it's meant to respond. And then gradually we expand and then leverage the guardrails and the models that we have in place where the human is only alerted based on, a trigger or an alarm set up within the guardrails.
You've seen kind of multiple pre-IPO teams throw bodies at go-to-market problems and watch it fail. What breaks when you scale headcount before that motion is ready?
Culture. Culture is so critical. When I was at Rapid 7, we were famous or infamous on our culture, and our culture was driven across the organization where we were driven by work hard and achieve success at all costs. And what we were doing because we were growing so quickly, by default, we started to create collaboration and train the trainer. And whether you use the analogy of a sports team where the seniors are able to support the incoming freshmen to get them up to speed because they experienced that from the seniors before them. That's what we were able to do at Rapid 7. So as we were hiring people, we did heavy collaboration and training together because we didn't have the, Rapid 7 University at that stage. We were very early. And then as people progressed and was successful, it was almost unspoken that they were responsible for training the new folks that were being hired and create that culture of not only support, but enablement. And that culture was always the challenge that we were fearful that we would lose that as we grew. And then more importantly, branched out into different offices throughout the world. So to answer the question, culture is so important, and the culture has to start with the leadership team, and it can't be just a poster on the wall. You have to live it, you have to believe in it, and if you don't believe in it, you really need to understand: is it something like should you continue or move on to another organization, or you should feel comfortable to bring everyone together inside the organization and question: has the culture changed? Is the culture strong enough? Because at the end of the day, the more, longevity and familiarity for individuals within the organization will allow you to be, advance very quickly. You can see sellers that have been in the role 2, 3, 4 years, their level of expertise, becomes second to none. They grow up in the industry, getting back to the method acting perspective. They know the challenges of the buyer, and they've created a network within the industry where they continue to see them at trade shows. So you don't want people to leave because of bad culture.
I totally agree. And There's another piece of this that I think is similarly important to this kind of conversation around how we move fast and build culture, which is this: as we grow, right? We outgrow the like founder led sales. How do you take the founder style sale, the kind of the instinct and energy, and actually break it down into something that a team of folks that aren't founders can execute?
Yeah, no, I think that's a big challenge because you're going to have a learning curve, and every lead and every potential meeting is so critical that trying to break it down into digestible pieces, but really supporting a team around it, I think is really, really critical. Shadowing is really important. I know there's gong calls and gong recordings, which are very powerful, but doing role plays leading up to a call, leveraging whether it's myself or other leadership in the team to join on the call, even if they're sitting back and just observing or having them play the role. Titles mean nothing. If I need to play a certain role, then I'll play a certain role. Like there shouldn't be any role or area that someone feels is beneath them. And I think when you have that collaboration, and then more importantly, after the call is done, quickly collaborating. If they called back right now, what are three questions you didn't ask that you'd ask right there? Right. And have those questions, keep them in your CRM or keep them near your laptop so that if you get a message fresh in your mind, hey, Jason, before I let you go, I forgot to ask, or can you give me clarity here? So learning what you would do differently, what are open items, what are things that you need to get ahead of while it's fresh in mind. Again, I know in this day and age we have Gong, it's a very powerful tool, but having that brainstorming or ability to go for a walk, if you're in the office with someone, grab coffee and just recount the call, the deal, and making sure you're aligned with next steps or different approaches you should take.
So, John, you're a few years into Alice. The business has been around 8+ years. What does that tell you about where the AI trust and safety category is right now?
So the category is starting to grow. You're starting to see regulation in Europe. You're starting to see regulation in Australia. There's discussions here in California and in the States. So, and then you see the investments from the foundation model companies, whether it was the Super Bowl ads or going mainstream. I joke that the 8-year-old and the 80-year-old talks about AI. I don't know if there's a true understanding of AI. I feel that if you ask 10 people, you get 10 different definitions, whether it's agentic AI, whether it's Gen AI, whether it's AI, whether it's machine learning. So there's still very, very early stages. Organizations are spending time and resources to understand. I feel like individuals are of one of two camps. Either they are fearful of it or they're embracing of it. But I think either way, if you're fearful of it or you're embracing it, the reassurance that there is safety and security guardrails that are available puts people at ease. So, actually compare it to the cybersecurity space. When I joined in the cybersecurity space, this concept of a CISO, even understanding who was overall responsible for security inside of an organization, sometimes it would be a network admin and sometimes it'd be a systems analyst, and it wasn't their full 100% responsibility. And as you continue to see, more of the digital footprint expand and you saw breaches and you saw those, oh, wow moments, it became a focus. It became a C level that reported to the board. It was, regulations and compliance and it continued to spread. We're at that stage right now where I see the cyber world was back in 2008, 2010, like those early stages. So it's just a matter of time, but it's a critical, critical component because if you can't trust and if you can't rely on your AI agent or model, you're not going to deploy it and you're going to fall behind.
All right, John, some kind of speed round, lightning round questions for you, quick hits, quick answers. All right. One metric you look at every week that most sales leaders ignore.
Number of contacts added to the CRM.
One discovery question every enterprise seller should ask, but almost never does.
Can you live with your current situation for another year?
All right. If you could leave one principle with a revenue leader who's been handed a genuinely hard kind of go to market problem, selling something critical, invisible, misunderstood, what would that principle be?
If you believe that the problem is real and you believe you have a solution, trust the process and let the process play out. It's never smooth. It's going to be rocky. But if you believe that the problem is real and you have a solution to solve that problem, trust the process.
Trust the process. I love it. All right, John, this was specific and real, exactly why I do this show. Where can people find you and Alice online? And is there anything you want to point listeners to?
Yeah, so we're at alice.io. We'll be at RSA next week out in the Bay Area. So we're excited there, but we're committed to making AI safe and secure. So we have great benchmark reports that if you're looking to understand, should you leverage Gemini or should you leverage Llama or Claude or any of the models, different use cases, you'll see how these models score. So please feel free to download that content or reach out to me directly and we'll provide you the insight because we're all learning together.
Where are you most active on online?
Uh, LinkedIn, LinkedIn is still
Still the place.
still the place.
Excellent. Well, perfect, John. Thank you for being here.
Excellent. Thank you, Jason.
That was John O'Donnell and a real operator's look at what it takes to sell something critical, invisible, and genuinely misunderstood. Here are my quick top 3 from today. If you don't remember anything else, remember these. 1, the 8-year-old and the 80-year-old test. I love this. John's framework for all of it. The GTM motion, the storytelling, the category creation, and education. It comes back to one question. Can you explain what you do to an 8-year-old and an 80-year-old? If you can't, you've missed the mark. That's not a simplicity exercise, that's a clarity exercise. And in a new category where buyers are still figuring out what they even need, clarity is a competitive advantage. 2, where there's smoke, there's fire. John doesn't prospect by title or list. He goes where his buyers actually congregate. Reddit forums, LinkedIn groups, Discord channels, conference rooms. If someone is spending time and energy in those circles, they feel the problem. That's your signal. The method actor doesn't wait for a lead. They live in the buyer's world until they know what the buyer knows. And finally, 3, stay in the journey. Always bring value. Never send, should I take you off my list? The AI FOMO problem creates a pipeline full of buyers who are interested but not committed. John's answer isn't push harder, it's to ride the journey with them. Benchmark reports, research team access, regulatory sounding boards, so that when they hit the 11th hour, you're already trusted. And if you believe the problem is real and you have a solution, trust the process. His words, let it play out. All right, here's one action that you can do this week in 10 minutes or less. Pick one prospect that has gone quiet. Instead of a follow-up asking for an update, send them something specific and useful. A data point, a story about a company in their industry, a question worth thinking about. Show up the way John would, as someone who belongs in the journey, not someone waiting to close it. All right, that's Frank Growth. If this gave you something you can use this week, follow the show and share it with one operator who needs it. I'm Jason Shafton from Winston Francois. We help tech companies build sustainable, repeatable growth with a proven operating system. Show notes and takeaways are in the description. Be frank and keep growing.